We are joined now by the one and only Mike Schaefer from Husker 24/7. Schaefer, what's going on, man?
Oh, not a lot. It's just another day in June. Things are busy, busiest month for me sometimes. But it's been good. It's been good.
Safe, we've been talking a ton about like quarterbacks and the offers, and you had the great last week. It was kind of not necessarily quarterbacks gaming the system, but how the eval can be kind of tough because of just showing up kind of like on the banquet circuit. Do you think with Coach Thomas and Nebraska's kind of how they're recruiting quarterbacks down the road now past Dylan, that we're going to be closer to getting similar types of quarterbacks on the roster? It seems like over the past 15 years, 20 years, we've had such a wide variance of the types of quarterbacks within the same roster. You think we're getting closer to a type of quarterback?
I don't necessarily think so. I don't think that TJ Lateef and Dylan Raiola are that similar. And then as you sort of continue down the line, a lot of it, I think, is there's just certain benchmarks or certain things that Glenn Thomas and Matt Rule and Marcus Satterfield are going to want from a quarterback, and it might just come in a different package with other talents and other skill sets. But I just don't know that I don't even know if you were to just ask a very basic, describe what Nebraska's looking for in their quarterback. I mean, I think, the obvious is you want a guy who has good arm strength and accuracy because they're going to rely on being able to throw the football. You want someone who can run, play action and has the ability to freeze a defense with that. But then beyond that, I mean, I think they would be comfortable if it's a person that is, more fleet of foot and you can utilize their legs at times. I don't think that's a requirement. And just like I think they would be fine if it's someone who isn't that quick, but has the ability to at least avoid pressure or can extend a play a little bit. So I just think there's different molds to how they're going to build it. And I think that's probably the right approach in the quarterback room. I just don't know that you can I don't know that you can say we want every quarterback to look like X and then have a successful recruiting endeavor, because the quarterback position continually changes and the skill sets of these players continually change. And so I think you just sort of have to have a few things that you want from every quarterback you bring in, and then the rest of the package could look wildly different from year to year.
Is it as simple to say as if a guy is swapped out or goes down with an injury that the offense doesn't have to stylistically change a ton? Is that safe?
I think that would be sort of where you want the arm talent. It doesn't, again, have to be, not everybody's going to have Dylan Raiola's arm talent. But I think that you want to be able to run similar plays, yes, regardless who's in at quarterback. And then that gets into the whole discussion of how different the offense might look in 24 with Dylan Raiola than it did in 23 with Heinrich Haarberg. But I also think a lot of that has to do with the personnel around him too. I think that you can run a different offense when you have Jamal Banks and Isaiah Nair and another year of Jalen Lloyd, and you've got maybe a deeper wide receiver core than you had last year. Certainly when Xavier Betts left the team, Isaiah Garcia-Castaneda gets hurt right away, and you lose Marcus Washington in the Illinois game. So I think some of what 23 ended up looking like was byproduct of what they could do and what they actually had personnel-wise beyond even just the quarterback.
Schaefer, wanted to get some updates on some of the guys that were in over the weekend. Obviously, a lot of big linemen on both sides of the ball were coming in. I'm not going to try and pronounce a name here, but any intel on how it went for
Tapu?
No, the Alafotulu?
SJ. How it went for SJ?
The Bishop Gorman guy. How did it go for the Bishop Gorman
SJ
guy?
Yeah, I mean, BC was able to catch up with him, and it sounded like, another one of these good visits. Nebraska has a pretty good relationship going on with Bishop Gorman, and we saw it with Xander Ruggeroli being added. I think that Donovan Raiola has done a nice job sort of appearing, during the evaluation periods at Bishop Gorman and getting FaceTime in. I mean, they had 3 official visitors already from that school this year. And, you know, a lot of what he was telling BC is similar to what we hear consistently when people come in. It's a very family-oriented vibe. I mean, that's essentially what he said. And that's what they want to do. And then obviously you want to show off your facilities and you want to show off, you know, what you think you're going to be as a program going forward. And you want to blend that family vibe with the idea that you're also this sort of untapped rocket ship that's just ready to launch, and people have the opportunity to be a part of something as it's on its way up, you know, from the ground level. I mean, that's definitely been a big part of the pitch for several years now. And I think he's receptive to it. But again, you know, big difference between getting the guy in for an official visit and then getting the yes out of a top 100 recruit in the country, one of the top offensive linemen in the country, a guy that you're having to go up against a number of teams for. But that Raiola relationship, especially with Bishop Gorman, I wouldn't rule it out. Right now, it looks like we have Miami as a leader on the 24/7 Sports crystal ball. So we'll see how that goes.
Hey, so before we get too far away, because you mentioned his name, what am I missing with Ruggeroli and like kind of how I fell into their lap isn't how it happened, but he seems like the tape looks better than how they got him. Is there something to that story that I'm missing?
I think that people did not view him on the same level of a lot of his teammates who are, you know, 4-star offensive linemen. He was the one senior on a group of offensive linemen that, you know, they have 4 other recruits now here in 26. I think the other guy's 27. And if you talk to some people who look at the film and threw it on, they would tell you they thought Ruggeroli was the best tackle on the team at times last year.
I thought that.
Yeah. And I know from talking to various people, Nebraska was pretty excited that they kind of just stole him. I mean, after one conversation I had last February and before we ran our Super 6, I made sure I put him in my sleeper spot just based on the way that, you know, someone who would know was talking about Nebraska's level of excitement of what he could be and just sort of the developable nature of that frame. I think he's a guy that, you know, in a couple years could be a tackle to know the name of here in Nebraska's program. And so I think there was just a lot of excitement that Arizona State and Washington State showed interest, but kind of were holding him back as a backup option. And Nebraska really sort of came through and pushed hard. And then there was a little bit of a numbers problem, and they were able to kind of figure it out with what you would call a Nebraska, you know, NIL scholarship. So I think it's going to work out well. And I would look for him to be a guy who potentially, you know, here in a couple of years is knocking on the door, potentially to replace somebody like Teddy Prohaska.
There's 2 guys in that class I think are flying under the radar with how they got him. I think is it DeForino, the DB that they have. I like both those guys, Ruggeroli and is it DeFornia? Help me with that.
I'm going to have to, because the name is not clicking for me, but we're in that point where I buried the 24 class in favor of knowing everything about 2025. So how dare you ask me about something?
And it is June, which, like, if you're trying to obviously following and covering Nebraska has been an extremely busy month for you. So you're always forgiven with recruiting.
Yeah, June is the month. I mean, June has become the month of the recruiting calendar. They're going to have 20 plus official visitors between last weekend and this upcoming weekend. I think that we could be, you know, on a roll of potential commitments starting this week. We saw Malcolm Simpson jump in. I think there's some more potential announcements that could be coming here through the middle of the week. And then you're going to get into a visit weekend where you have some guys that I think Nebraska is bringing them in here to essentially get them to say yes. And so, you know, it could be a good week for Nebraska to go from, say, 11 commits to, you know, 14, 15, and then here by the middle of July, they could be closing in on 18 to 20. And so I just think it happens relatively quickly. And I think June is going to be the time of year where they really can get a lot of work done and then set themselves up for sort of the rest of the cycle and to kick the ball forward into the 2026s and 2027s.
We're talking with Mike Schaefer from Husker 24/7. I know you kind of hinted at a few more commits. Are there any names you are able to tell us that maybe we should be looking at more specifically than others?
Yeah, there's a defensive back coming in this weekend, Noah King from Ohio. I definitely think Nebraska, if the visit goes well, I definitely think Nebraska could close out with an addition to their defensive secondary there. And then the one I mentioned him last week, and I still haven't put in a crystal ball. I've been talking about putting in a crystal ball for like 3 months. I'm not sure why. I'm just hesitant on doing it, but Houston Kahina Torres, the offensive lineman from Hawaii. I just think he has so much respect for the Raiola family, so much respect for Nebraska football. And he was being recruited as far out as Scott Frost's staff. So he just has a lot of interest in Nebraska. And I think that he wants to be part of this class and part of this offensive line group. Another name to keep in mind, Raheem Hutchins Jr., wide receiver from Shadow Creek in Pearland, Texas, school that Nebraska's recruited. Braylon Prude came from there last year. This is a guy that I know Garrett McGuire has been working on pretty much all spring. And I think it's just down to Nebraska and I believe one other school. So I wouldn't be surprised if a commitment could come pretty quickly after the weekend if everybody feels good about things. Yeah, I think it's like Nebraska and Memphis at this point.
Hey, Shafe, how much scuttlebutt? We've been talking about him the last couple of days just because he's fresh off his visit, and he leaves Friday. He's going to miss the second day of our 7-on-7 tournament this week with Christian Jones and how his recruitment has gone.
Yeah, I actually talked with Christian on Monday night. He gave me a call and we talked for a little while, and it's one of those things that's always.
What's funny? I'm going to pay you I'm going to pay you probably your only compliment because they cut up some Benning bites where I said something nice about you yesterday, and that was one too many for the week. But he did say that he doesn't, in his words, mind talking to you. He can see why I like you.
Oh, well, that's nice. I appreciate that. I'll take that. That's a win. In recruiting coverage, if they don't mind talking to you, that's a big win.
And he's tough, right? Like he's not going to be for everybody in terms of covering. So I felt like that kind of spoke volumes.
Yeah, I think it helps that I don't try to blow anybody's phone up. I think that's usually the strategy that tends to work well for me in the end. Maybe not at the beginning.
Because he'll shut that thing off.
Yeah. So talked with Christian last night, and it's always fascinating. You have these guys, and Christian's been a recruit since a freshman year of high school. He's been to Nebraska so many times. He didn't need to go through the facilities. He didn't need to do the car wash thing. He knows all about the history and all of that. And so a lot of it was just being able to spend time with Tony White, spend time with Coach Dvorak, spend time with Matt Rule. And I think he feels very good about the plan that they would have for him. I think he feels good about what the future would look like at Nebraska. All indications that I've got from him or from those around him is that he just wants Nebraska to show him something before he's ready to completely shut this thing down. And there's some other schools in the mix. Miami's starting to get involved in the recruitment. That's kind of an interesting one to me. You could see a visit there potentially in July. He's going to go to Oklahoma next week. But I don't know that I would say that there's a team that I view at this point that's a really close second for Nebraska. It feels like Nebraska's biggest competition is itself. So if the Huskers don't take care of business early in the year, they might lose Christian Jones because he doesn't necessarily – I think that he wants to see them win. I mean, think about it. I think the last winning season of his lifetime, he was in third grade. So, like, I think it's – in some instances, there's definitely recruits like this that everything sounds great. I need to see it play out before I'm ready to put my name on the line for your team. And I think that's where we're at with Christian Jones.
Yeah, it's interesting because people want to compare, and I don't refute, confirm, or deny, but I will say this out loud to you today. You know, people compare their recruiting, Caleb and Christian, and why maybe some things on the surface look the same, they're for completely different reasons. It's not even close. Like, I wouldn't even compare the two really, except for the timeline in which they maybe that they maybe would make a college decision. They're for vastly different reasons. He's just a kid, like you said, that he goes by. It's like when I give him plays or we'll go through schemes and stuff, he visualizes outcomes before we do it, right? Like, he'll visualize reps before we do it. And I think he's just one of those guys that tries to give all angles of how the future could play out before he does anything. I mean, it took him a year to like me, which, some people never come around. So I mean,
I was going to say that's a relatively short amount of time for some
Still
individuals.
working on it.
Props to him, but it's just his personality. Like, I can't explain it to people any simpler than that. He's just, it takes a lot from the trust standpoint.
Yeah, well, I think there's something to be said for doing your due diligence, and he also strikes me as someone who's going to make this decision once. It's not like I'm going to make my decision today, and then 2 months from now, something shiny and new has my attention, and I'm going to go with that. I just don't think that's who he is. And so I think part of it is I want to get all the information I possibly can, sit back and think, and then make the decision that I think is best for me. I mean, that's what it seems like with him. And the reason it seems so different is a lot of your in-state kids have already made a decision by the time he's looking at, which would be, in the season. But Caleb didn't, and that's why those comparisons come up.
As Ravi can attest, I was talking to him yesterday off air, and he doesn't pay any attention to who else is in the fold. Like, not who's being recruited, not who's already there. Like, that's not his thing. Even when he left Burke, the natural assumption is that he would just follow Coach Lamanji to Westside. He even took 2 months to figure that out. You know what I mean? Like,
Methodical.
I just don't want him knocked for his personality, because it just is what it is. And it's not I guess I'm kind of trying to protect him just personally from he's stringing Nebraska along, or we know he's going to eventually say, listen, I don't know anything. I just know that he is going to take his time. It's what he does with everything.
There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's Grant Bricks did the same thing last year. I mean, you have different recruits go about it differently. And this isn't a super light, easy, just make the decision and it has no ramifications. Like you're choosing where you play for football. You're betting on individuals to help you with your aspirations to go to the NFL. Like it should be a thought out decision.
Schaefer, so let me ask you this, because we talked yesterday a little bit about guys that kind of enjoy the recruiting process maybe a little bit too much. Have you, and I'm putting you on the spot here, so I apologize, but have you noticed any correlation between guys that like being recruited too much and either guys that maybe don't last in the program or don't live up to the hype?
Not necessarily. It's hard because
we make that in our head. I think that's what we're talking about in our head sometimes. And so I'm just curious if you've actually noticed that.
I don't necessarily believe that to be true. Because I think so much of recruiting has nothing to do with what ultimately happens when someone gets into a football program. I mean, I think coaches definitely want to vet an individual to see if there's a real reason that they're going to take a visit, or that, if they have actual interest in Nebraska, or if they just got in the car of a coach and, they're here because of that. So I think you have to do a lot of inventory as to whether this recruit is taking visits with real intention and that sort of thing. But none of that has to do with what it's like on a Tuesday in, October, and you're a freshman and you're having to, go through school for the first time, and you're going through football for the first time. I mean, you hope that when you've done recruiting, you can sort of figure out how are these people going to be able to handle this, but no one ultimately knows. And, you know, some guys who lock in on a program right away and know exactly what they want to do and everything looks great. And they get to Nebraska and within 1 year, they realize like it's not where they need to be. So I would hesitate to apply too much in terms of labels. You know, there's definitely people who like the attention. And there's definitely people who like the phone calls and the games and all of it. But there's also people who claim that they don't. And then they're the ones who end up committing to 3 different schools in 4 months. Everyone's sort of different. You have to make decisions based on you. And sometimes your decisions are taken out of your hands. You know, you might have a staff that just drops you from a class late in a cycle or things of that nature. So I would hesitate to apply to put too much label on what someone's recruitment looks like for their career at a school.
Yeah, I think I think a lot of that is kind of how you personally, like, that has a Schaefer prism written all over it, right? Because you're just not really judged, even though you'll have strong takes. Like you don't really judge people's. That's just not your style. Like you kind of just
try not to, because
right? Just let people be.
I don't know what their life is. I talk to some of it's really hard. I don't want to pass judgment on a lot of these recruits because I don't get to talk to them that much. I talk to them, you know, like let's say a kid that commits to Nebraska, you know, in April, I've talked to twice before he commits. I probably talked to about 4 more times during the football season and send messages here or there. I don't really know these people, so I shouldn't pass a ton of judgment on who they are or what their decisions are. But I only know a glimpse of what they tell me. You know, I only know the portion that they're willing to show.
Schaefer, I have to say, you shouldn't let a lack of information discourage you from judging people. I never do.
I mean, like, I certainly judge. I just may not verbally pass
classic Ravi right there. I barely know the guy, but here's what I think about him.
Not a big Dan Hurley fan.
Never met the guy.
Dion, enormous a-hole.
I think that tracks.
So I do feel like I know enough about Dion.
Hey, Schaefer, real quick. You mentioned I'm kind of with you on somebody else or two saying yes this week. What position group do you think? Is it a group that needs the bump or a group that you think is just going to get a bump?
I think it's just a group that's going to get a bump. I don't know. Looking at this class, I don't know that I'm at the point where there's anything or any position where it's like they need to get a guy here. I mean, they got Parker at running back, and that pretty much satiated where I was with their running back recruiting at the very least. Any addition to that would just seem like a good thing, but not necessarily a had to have it.
That's Mike Schaefer from Husker 24/7. Schaefer, we appreciate the time as always. We will talk to you again next week.
All right, guys. Have a good one.
Thanks, Schaefer.